Hi. Um, so today I want to take a look at containerized build environments, development environments. And so the idea of this, if you're unfamiliar, is we're going to be working with containers and using them as a way to develop and work on code. And so why you might want to do this is it gives you a consistent, reproducible environment that you can just pass to anybody and say, hey, if you want to work on this project, use this. I've never really used them. I've like touched them, but not in any serious capacity. And so I just kind of want to play with them. Visual Studio Code has some extensions to do remote development inside of them. So we should be able to just use Visual Studio Code normally, but inside of that environment. And so that is sort of part of the experience I'm trying to get to. I might change up my settings just a little bit. So when we're using remote development, this little green thing down here, open a remote window, that is going to change to say where we are. So you're probably going to want to see that in order to just tell what's going on. So I'm gonna move my webcam up just a little bit, and hopefully this is useful. I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know what we're going to accomplish. I'm hoping we can just start with some basic C# stuff and move on from there. So we'll just start at a terminal and go to there. And then I have a C# folder, and we'll just start here. And do I have any interesting projects that would be good to start with? Or we can just do some other things to kind of get started. Since I don't really know what's required, let's start with just absolute basics. So let's do .NET new console and give it a name, and we're going to call it containerized development, I guess. We'll see what happens here. But the idea is we now have this containerized development place. And so I should be able to just open that up, and we're going to reuse our code window. Why not? And we'll just do containerized. Oh, I have two container things. There we go. So we'll do that. That should open up a Visual Studio Code instance that we can just kind of work in. And let's open up a terminal. There we go. And so what I would like to do is create something. So let's do .NET run. So this should just run whatever's in this program, and I guess we'll get hello world. And so what I want to be able to do is create a development environment that has .NET installed. And so the idea here is that you don't need to install .NET on your development machine in order to develop this project. Obviously, this is super simple. We're just working in .NET. There's not anything really complicated going on here. But once you get into bigger projects, there's usually a lot of dependencies that are required to build your project. And typically there's some setup involved there. If we have a container that we can just say, use this, we can have that container already include everything that you need. Already have everything installed, already be configured the way that we need it to be configured. And so all you need is to say, here's the code, here's the environment, go. And it should be the same for everybody if we're doing this right. And so that's what we need to figure out how to do, because I don't actually know how to do any of that. So we're gonna figure it out. So we're gonna do VS Code containerized environments. Here we go. Whole thing on developing inside a container. So they have some diagrams here of how this whole thing's gonna work. Pretty much you run Visual Studio Code, it connects to a server inside the container, and then everything that would be required is actually inside that container. So there will be a mount of your source code. So the way this works is containers can mount specific volumes. This is like a drive, I guess, of a normal computer. You can plug in random drives or directories and say, this is the same thing as this. It's sort of like a symbolic link, but it's on two different things. And so we can actually symbolically link these. I don't know if a symbolic link is a good analogy here, but we're going to go with it. And so effectively, we'll have files on our local system we'll effectively just download all the code. Like I already have the code on my system. We're going to mount that in the container, so the code is the same. And then we're also going to include a whole bunch of other stuff. And so effectively, we're just going to host that Visual Studio Code server inside of that. And inside of that container, there's also going to be like a .NET runtime or the .NET SDK so that we can actually build on this stuff. So what we need is Docker Desktop. I should already have that installed. So I should be able to just do Docker. I guess PS should work. Okay, don't have Docker running. There we go. Let's get that started because that's required. Otherwise, this isn't going to work. I should mention also, I'm working on Windows, but I have Linux containers enabled. There are two types of containers that you can use when you're working on Windows. There are Windows-based containers and there are Linux-based containers, and they are not the same. Linux containers are probably what you want most of the time, because that's what most of the standard stuff is going to be built for. But if you're working with, say, a legacy .NET application that's running on IIS or something like that, or you want to run an older version of PowerShell or just do like Windows stuff, you're going to need a Windows container. And that's actually going to be based on Windows instead of based on some variant of Linux. And so there's some differences there. So that should be started now. So we should just be able to do this. We don't have anything running. That's fine. There should be like a Docker info or something like this. This isn't right. Docker about. Docker version. I'll get there eventually. That's not particularly what I was expecting. I guess we are getting a server version, so I'm imagining that's useful. I don't really know what I expected, so I don't really know if this tells me what I think it should tell me. So that's not particularly helpful in any way. But we'll skip that. So we need to host this container because that's how this works, and I don't know how to do that. So installation, we need to install Docker, and then settings, file sharing. Okay, so we just need to configure file sharing. That should already be configured. We might get some issues. And then we need the remote development extension pack, which I don't know if I actually have. That's going to be under extensions, and so we want remote. And so there's three different kinds. There's the Windows subsystem for Linux, which is going to allow you to do like Ubuntu stuff. I can actually give you a demo of that as well. So what we can do is open up, not that, that's another PowerShell instance. Let's open up just normal Ubuntu. And this, is misconfigured. So my default shell is wrong. So I need to start Z shell. But now that we're here, we should be able to go into mount E, development, C#, containerized. There. So now we're in the same spot, right? And I can still run code, but I'm going to open it up in a new window and give it that period. So we're going to open up the same environment, but in a Linux environment. So I'm actually in the Windows subsystem for Linux. And so when I open this up, it's actually going to open up a remote session. And what that means is that I am not on my normal Windows system. I'm actually inside of my Ubuntu subsystem inside of Windows. I think that's the right terminology, but I don't really know. And so we're going to see the same things. And if I change one, I should change the other. But my actual runtime should be Z shell here instead of PowerShell. And I'm not interacting with Windows. I'm working in Ubuntu. So this is sort of how this will work. But we want to effectively reproduce this environment inside of a container. So I don't need to do all of this because I don't even think I have .NET installed. Oh, I do. Perfect. So I can do .NET run. And this should work. Or we'll get interesting. Okay, so that's something else. That's just a random error. Not an error, but Just warning? It looks like a warning. Yeah. Cannot read state of something, which is fine. So we're going to ignore that. But that is, I guess, kind of what we're trying to do. We're trying to get this environment more or less reproduced in a container so that we can do this without having to do all the installation steps that are required. So I can just say, use this, do this, done. That's the idea. So we need this remote containers thing. Looks like we already have it. So it's already installed. So that should be good. So all we need to do now is to try a dev container. So start VS Code, try a sample. Let's skip that. Open an existing folder in a container. That's what we want. Open folder in container, and it will give us all of these different images, it looks like. So it looks like we can use an existing Docker file, which would let us build the image ourselves, or we should just be able to give it a Docker Compose file. Interesting. Okay. So Docker Compose is actually going to take multiple of these things, multiple containers, and be able to orchestrate all of them for you. So if you want to run a bunch of things, Docker Compose gives you a way to say, start this .NET environment and this Nginx environment that does something, and this database. You can start all of those with a single file instead of having to like manually say run this and then run this and then run this. So it just makes that a little bit simpler for you. Let's see. I guess we can just try using their default things and see what it changes. So I think the easiest way to do this is going to be to start here and do a git init. Do we already have git? What? Why would it be trying? Okay. Yeah, that seems weird. Is it because I have two versions open? Maybe that's it. There. Okay. So for whatever reason, trying to open a git or creating a new git repo inside of something that is open in two different places wasn't doing what I wanted it to. So we're gonna skip whatever was causing that. And now we have this. The reason I did that I started a git repo is that I can actually track these changes. And so what I'm going to do is create a git ignore. And we are going to ignore our bin and our object folder. We can tweak this later, but this should be good enough for us. So the double star should ignore any directory. So bin and object should be excluded wherever they appear. Just in case they start appearing in some other place, this will cover that. And this is just excluding a directory name that. We could also just name this bin and object. We don't need that. And that would just include the top level. But we can do whatever we want. So that should get rid of both of those. And so now we just have these three files. So we should be able to do a git status and see three files there. And so let's just do this in Visual Studio. So if we add all three of these, initial project, sure. This is just a sample, so it doesn't really matter. This probably isn't going to end up anywhere. You're not going to really see this probably. It's just a way for us to actually see these changes. So we'll actually be able to see here what the actions we're taking are changing. So if we go here and do a open folder in container, we should just be able to open this folder in a container. And it looks like it's already detected that we're doing C# because it's giving us C# options here. I could be wrong. Maybe it's just giving us everything that it knows. But their examples showed things like Node, and there is no option for Node here. And so I'm assuming that it's a little bit smart. So we want to do .NET Core 3.1, which should be what I'm running. I can actually check that. And we should see something happen. So first thing, this is a new version of Visual Studio Code. I'm going to move that again. I don't know why it's off, but this should be a new version of Visual Studio Code with whatever's going on. This is going to take a while to start up because it needs to actually, one, pull that container, or it looks like it's building the container. And then two, it actually needs to do something. And it closed my other version of Visual Studio Code. Okay. So I guess we're here anyway. So let's do a git status. So this should show us everything that's changed. And so now we have this untracked dev container folder that got created. So let's go in there and just see what, oh, I guess our container has started. Cool. So let's do a Docker PS. Inside of PowerShell. Otherwise we'd be running just weird things. But we now have this thing. So there's this VSC containerized development blah, and it's running some shell that's echoing something and has no ports exposed or anything. And so this is our, I guess, our development environment. That is this. We're inside of it right now. And so there are two things here. There's devcontainer.json, which is big. And doesn't seem to have configured much. It seems like it's just configuring what extensions should be included in the server. So there are two ways to install extensions in Visual Studio Code. When you're doing remote development, there is a server and there is your client. And so different things should run in different places depending on what you're doing. And so in this case, I'm assuming these extensions are the ones that are going to exist on the server. And so if we actually go into extensions, we should be able to see that. And so there are, it's actually showing us our dev container here. So I can expand this. So we have our dev container, which is where we're actually developing. And then we have our client. So I have a whole bunch of extensions that I run, but we're running C# on in this particular case. So we're actually developing for C#. And so this is installing the C# extension inside of our container so we can actually access some of those things. And so that should give us access to, say, the C# language server. So we can actually do fancy C# things and actually detect, is this a class or whatever, and get some syntax highlighting, things like that. We'll probably also get all the other fun stuff that offers. But that's how that works. It doesn't seem like there's much else. You should be able to configure like your shell here. It would need to be installed inside of your container, whatever that is. But this is gonna launch whatever it is. I don't really know what that's doing. Docker file, it looks like you just give it a Docker file. There's some docs here. We can go and check those out later. But also there's a name. So I guess, how does this work? Remote container attached to a running container. Open a attached container configuration file. Attached to a running container. Not really sure what that's going to do. Rebuild it. Reopen locally. So I guess reopen locally will kind of get us out of this environment. If we're done working inside of a container, this will get us out and actually let us do other things. Open a workspace in a container. These are like opening new projects. Not sure. I had kind of expected to be able to switch containers, but I guess not. There is the ability to forward ports here. This would be required if, let's say, we're developing for ASP.NET or any other web server, I guess. You would need to be able to access your web server, and so you would need to forward your port because otherwise you're not going to see it. And so this is going to give you a way to actually expose those, so you can expose them. What else? Optional to reuse your local HTTPS dev certs, first export it locally. So if you're using certs, this gives you an option to do that. They have Mac and Windows things, so that those should be fine. We're not using those. We're not doing anything with that right now, so it should be fine. What else? Mounts. So if we need to actually mount specific file paths, maybe additional things from some other place or whatever, we can specify that. So we can, because this is running in a container and we're only including these files, so this container, our development container, only has access to the files inside of this environment. And so what that means is if I want to use anything else on my computer, I need to mount that somehow, because otherwise it's not going to exist. There's not going to be any way for this container to see it. So if I ls here, we'll see all of these things. But if I go up, I'm at the root directory, and there's not much here. I would assume, like we go into our user directory, and it's all just like standard stuff. There's not much in our home directory, I don't think. Just VS Code. And so it's like there's nothing extra here. This is just what's required for this folder to work. And so if you need other stuff, you need to actually figure out how to get that. And I don't remember how to get back to where I was. So let's do workspaces. There. And so this is where we are. And so if I run .NET, okay, it does exist. So I can run .NET run. And this should compile and run our .NET code. So we can actually just keep doing this. But we're not running this code locally. I could not have .NET installed at all, and this should still work because it's not requiring anything local on my computer. It's all coming from this container. So the only really hard dependency here is that I have some ability to run containers, like Docker, and so that gives you a useful tool, because then if you want to say run Java, you can just run Java. You don't need anything else. So that should be helpful. The advantage here also is this Docker file is now shared as part of my code base. So if I look at the changes, the Docker file and dev container are part of that. And so we can just ship this with our repo and just pass this around to people. And they should be able to pick this up and just start using it. And so the advantage here is that the entire team could be using the exact same thing. And that isn't necessarily true if you're all developing. Maybe somebody has a different version of .NET. Maybe they're running .NET 3.0 instead of .NET 3.1 or 2.0 or 2.1. And then they need to upgrade, or it doesn't work and they get some weird error. Or they have like some custom installation of it and they've moved it somewhere or done something, or have like 6 versions all with different variables defined or something for different projects. Weird things can happen. And it's probably more of a thing with something like, say, Python, where you're going to be pulling down all of these Python packages, and you might have Python 2 and Python 3, though hopefully not Python 2 anymore. But you might just have these like different things running. And so you want to swap them out. This gives you a way to do that, because for one project, it may have certain requirements. And so you can only download those, and then you're good. You don't need to download every dependency for every project in all cases, just for what you're running. So let's take a look at this container and actually kind of walk through and see what it's doing, because it looks a little bit different than I remember the .NET thing. But I could be wrong. So it's based off of the .NET Core SDK. So this is like the standard Microsoft package for .NET Core. These will be at different versions, so like 3.0, 3.1, whatever version of .NET you're trying to run, that would be the one you'd choose. But then it's defining a whole bunch of other things. So it's giving us a username, but it doesn't look like we're using that unless I'm... Who am I? Root. I am root. I am not VS Code. So I don't know where that's coming from. As a non-root user with sudo access. Okay, so you'd have to actually specify a parameter inside of dev container to use that. So let's figure out what that is. We don't need that. Let's go in here. So you would, if you wanted to use a different user, maybe not root, because that you just don't want to use root. You can actually provide a specific user. And so in this case, we've actually created that inside of this Docker file. And so that's what this seems to be defining. It's installing Node.js. Why? I'm not sure why that's required. But okay. Seems like there's a whole bunch of like things that are here in case, like just toggle switches that you can just turn on if you want to. I'm not entirely sure why they're there, but they are. We should just be able to take those out, and it should still be fine. So let's try that. So those are gone now. I might regret that, but we'll see. We're probably going to see some other node stuff in here. If install node is true, then do all of that. Okay, bye. So all of that is gone. I think that's for ASP.NET. It says right here. Maybe there's a dependency there. We don't need this. We're not really working with cloud stuff, so that can go away too. And then this is just cleaning up after apt. So basically, this is just a big long command that is pulling a whole bunch of the dependencies down for making a really nice developer environment. So things like Git, for example, would not typically be included inside of just a basic .NET Core SDK, because it isn't required for the .NET Core SDK to work. And so they're still nice to be able to like SSH and be able to reuse Git and be able to just run curl and like things like that. Those are handy. And so they're added here as sort of like a handy tools that you might want. You could probably add a whole bunch of other things here, but we're probably not going to need to mess with that. It's setting up some groups for you, just so you're, in this case, VS Code user is part of some group. Let's see here. It's installing. Oh, it's adding you to a sudoers file. So the VS Code user can use sudo and actually do sudoer stuff. And then it's just, cleaning up after itself. So you might be wondering why these are all here. Like this isn't actually required. You could not do that, but do like run and not get rid of those ands. This is totally okay. This would work. The reason this isn't done is it creates a whole bunch of layers inside of your images. And so if we actually look at what this image is doing, each of these lines is a new layer inside of that image. And so those layers effectively are modified versions of the base. And so we have this .NET Core SDK sitting here. And then the next layer is going to be adding this VS Code user and things like that. And so each of those is actually a new change. It's like adding a new Git commit. We're effectively just layering all of those things. And so by combining all of them, it removes a whole bunch of those and can help shrink down the amount of things that are required as part of this image. So that can be kind of helpful. It's not something that I'm super well aware of, so I'm gonna try to hand wave a little bit, but that's sort of how that ends up working. I don't know what this is. Yeah, I don't know what this environment variable does. So we're just gonna leave it. Okay, so a little confused. They're switching to non-interactive mode, which I'm assuming means there's no prompts for yes and no. when you're doing this apt-get stuff. But we should already be doing that unless I'm missing something. And then it's switching back is my understanding. That's my hunch, but this is not something that I know a lot about. So let's figure that out. Debian front end. What does this mean? Environment variable. Okay, a whole bunch of things here. One of Debian config's unique features is that the interface it presents to you is only one of many, and it can be swapped at will. There are many Debian config frontends available. Dialog, the default frontend, it uses whiptail or dialog programs to display questions. Readline, the most traditional, and then non-interactive is the anti-frontend apparently, and it never interacts with you at all. So if you want to avoid interactions, which makes sense in this case, by doing this, where were we? It prevents us from getting like, would you like to actually install this or not? Questions. And if you can avoid those when you're actually running a tool, that's probably a good thing. Again, not something I'm super familiar with, so I'm gonna kind of hand wave, but that seems like it makes sense, and we can kind of leave it. But we've kind of been modifying this at will, and I don't actually know if it still works. So what I should have done before I made all these changes is commit everything, because then we would have we'd be able to see the changes and see what we removed. I didn't do that. So that whole creating a Git repo thing kind of went out the window, but that's okay. We'll pretend like it made sense. Why is it saying this is modified? Okay, weird. I don't know what that is, but okay. For some reason, it thinks all of these are modified. Maybe that's just a consequence of us joining this container. That might be it. But I'm not sure. Like there's no actual changes here. So the only thing that might be a difference is a change in like line endings, because Linux and Windows have different line ending changes. But I'm not actually sure. So yeah, that's fun. So before we do any of that, let's try to remote containers, rebuild container. What does this do? Throws an error. Error occurred building the container. Unknown instruction. Cool. And that's not going to actually work because we were inside of our container making those modifications. And if I had to guess, our container doesn't exist anymore. So because we tried to rebuild it, the old one died, and we tried to create a new one, but it didn't work. And so now we're stuck in this weird situation where our old container broke, but now we're stuck here trying to figure out how to do this. Not there. Yeah. So we just need a slash here. So this actually starts allows us to kind of jump to the next line without executing everything. So it's kind of an escape of the end of line. And so that slash is what allows us to keep continuing this giant chain of commands. If we don't have that, what it's going to do is it's going to hit wherever that was missing, which is right here. And it's going to try to execute everything up to that point. And then it's going to get here and say, oh, there's an and I don't know what to do with that because that shouldn't start a line, and throw a bunch of errors and get mad at us. And that's what happened. So we should just be able to remote containers. Is there a run? So we can open the folder in a container. What if we reopen in a container? What does that do? So it looks like it's automatically picked the only container we have available to us. I don't know what happens if we have multiple. I'm not sure that's even an option. I honestly have no idea what would happen. But that's there. So, okay. But this seems better. We're actually getting attached to everything. And if I run this, we can actually see that 14 seconds ago, this container started up and started doing things. And there is everything that we wanted. One thing that we could do if we didn't want to use Visual Studio Code to do all of this is we should just be able to exec into that container. So I'm going to exec and give us an interactive terminal. That's not what this means, IT. That's not actually what that means. That's just what I always assume it. That's how I remember it, I guess. Because I gives you interactive and T does something else. I'm pretty sure. But anyway, it doesn't really matter because that's what we need to do. And we just need to run it with some shell that exists inside that container. And now we're in the same spot. And we're still running as root. So we should be able to go to the same space. So workspace is containerized development. And now we should be able to run this here using like .NET run. And this will actually allow us to run .NET workloads anywhere from this container. And so we don't actually need to do this through Visual Studio Code once it's actually hosted. Really, the only thing that Visual Studio Code is doing for us is giving us this nice editor experience and also establishing some other things. So if we do Docker info, I may have this. Oh, I'm inside of the container. That's not going to work. So what we want to do is let's just get help. I don't know what command I want. But we should be able to actually investigate what's inside of this container. So Docker container, not that. Heck. What was it called? Also, I've been using the name here. We don't need to. We could actually just use the container ID. They work as the same thing. So there's no actual difference. Container help. Does that work? Maybe. How do we do this? It's been a while. About? No, not there. Info, logs. I'm trying to see, so there should be some sort of definition, I guess. Oh, inspect. That's what we want. But we should be able to actually go in and see everything that is configured for this container. So there's a whole bunch of things that end up happening, and this is what we end up getting. And so this is actually what all the fun stuff that's happening. And so we should be able to go in here and see things like our mounts. And so this is taking why? Okay, that's kind of interesting. This looks more like a WSL, a Windows subsystem for Linux path than it does a Windows path. So it's taking this path and mounting it here. And this is effectively telling us that volume mount. And so if we could redefine this, we would be able to do everything that this is doing without having to actually do any of this. There's other stuff going on here, but that's like the big thing that's going on is this mount. And so we could just skip all of that and just use the mount instead. But we don't need to. This read write is, or RW, I guess, is telling us that we can read and write to the directory. You can create like read-only volumes, which might be useful if you want to like make a file system. Like let's say you want to stream media or something. You can only host all of your documents and make it so people can only read it but they can't write to it. You can do something like that. But that's not happening here because it's a development environment. We need to be able to write to it. So that, I guess, is all I want to explore there. But I think this is mostly these development environments, right? We've kind of covered how to do this. We could, I think, kind of avoid almost all of this. So let's see what happens if we make this as simple as we can. And so I think this is all we need, right? I don't think we need anything else. Because all we're doing is getting into this image and running .NET blah. And so we're not curling anything. We're not using any of those other commands. And we're not using the VS Code user. So we can drop all of that and just use this. And so theoretically, this should work. I didn't really think this through before I did it. I just did it. But we'll see. And we'll get an error if it doesn't work. But hopefully, this just starts up. The image should be pretty quick to come up. And then we should just be able to do .NET run and see hello world. And there we go. And so now we didn't need anything. Like all that complex stuff we didn't need. If there were extra dependencies or something, we'd probably want to include those here. So for example, if we were including like Newtonsoft, so we could do JSON parsing or some other library, it might be useful to do some sort of restore here, but that isn't required. And we can just have that be part of like your getting started phase. So you just do .NET restore. I think that's the name for it. Yeah. And that would restore all your dependencies. And so worst case, you run .NET restore and then .NET run and you're good to go. But this is, I guess, the bare minimum. But I think we can go even further. I don't think this is necessarily where we need to stop. I'm thinking I can take this and delete that Docker file entirely and provide something else here. So if we do container environment variables, container user, that's not what we want. Docker build related options. So what I'm wondering is it possible for you to provide somebody with just a container? So you have a pre-built container and you just pass that along to people. You don't even need to build your container. You can just have it and be good to go. I don't really know if you can do that, but we're going to find out. Like, really, it's doing the same thing, I guess. So this isn't really that big of a deal. I just feel like it'd be simpler if there wasn't a Docker file here, because this is the same thing. We're going to be running this container. So what happens if I just do that? What happens? I have no idea. So we're gonna find out. It gets mad at us. It's really mad. So I think it looks like it's trying to actually open a file named this. That's not what we want. That's pretty not great. So let's fix that. Another downside to this whole thing, you lose your entire like IDE setup in this case, I guess, if this is incorrect. So if you screw this up, you can't maintain your development environment. So instead of like trying to create the new one and then bringing the old one down, and once the new one is spun up, it brings the new one down, or the old one down immediately while trying to bring the new one up. And so because of that, you actually lose everything if this gets messed up in some way. That is okay, I think. But it could be a little bit annoying. Like here, I can't undo this. We modified this to do this string instead of a Docker file, but I can't undo this anymore because we lost all of our history because we lost our container environment. That is annoying. For the most part, with like Git and stuff, you're probably fine. It's just no fun. So I guess that's one of the downsides of this approach. Is this can become a little bit more difficult. So we can fix it. Like, there's not too much going on, so it's pretty easy to fix. But it's a downside that can happen, especially if you're making a large change and you spend like hours on something, and then you screw one thing up, you lost everything. Especially if this is a big project, and you're not just changing this developer environment, that could cause some annoyance, I think. So yeah, this Docker file points there. All right, let's see if this is defined more out here. Let's see what we can find, because maybe there is a way for us to provide a container without providing a Docker file. And then you could have like separation of the concerns. So you could have somebody else maintaining your Docker file and somebody else doing this. And you could actually use like a remote path for that Docker file. They have a bunch of sample containers over there. Okay, so it looks like we can pass in an image instead. So instead of this, let's do image. And let's pass in this. That's not right. Let's pass in this. And so if I restart this, what happens? Does it work? Seems like it kind of knows what it's doing. There we go. So now we have this container and we're using an image instead of our Docker file. So I didn't need to rebuild this image. If I had a bunch of modifications, I wouldn't be rebuilding them. I wouldn't be doing a bunch of that stuff. So the advantage of this approach is, let's say we do have all of those configurations like we had previously, or we're pulling a bunch of dependencies and we have this really large image. Maybe there's a bunch of processes that need to get run or something, or you need to spin up a bunch of things or touch some different files or do all this stuff. If we can do all of that and store the end result, we can just pass in an image and say, use this, and that's all you need. And so you don't need to build anything, you just need to pull that image. And so instead of the time being pulling the base layer and then doing all those steps, instead of all of that, what you're doing is actually just pulling a single image. And so the time to actually develop and do all of this stuff drops, or should drop, I'm assuming, because everything should go a little bit faster. So yeah, I think this, for me, feels like the nicer way. The downside of this is you're separating these two things out. And so one of the downsides I could see from doing this image approach is if you don't have access to this image and you need to add something new, then weird things happen. Hopefully you have access to this image. Or like it's a relatively easy thing for you to modify. If you don't, I wouldn't probably use this, just because that just seems complicated. But I guess they both kind of have their advantages. It seems like using a Docker file could be more flaky, and it would be a lot easier using a Docker file to create those conflicts of changing both project files and the developer environment simultaneously, and that causing all that loss of progress, I guess, or loss of history. But outside of that, I think everything seems fairly good. Yeah, I think this is like most of what I wanted to explore here. Like it covers most of the stuff. We can change the name if we want to, so we could do my C# environment, for example, and just rebuild this. That should work fine. Also, let's try to hook up a debugger to this. So we should still be able to use all of our normal IDE tools here. And so one of my expectations is that we should be able to run a debugger, and we should be able to use like normal tasks. So I should be able to do a task run build. I should be able to run this and actually have it do something. I don't have any of those defined, so we're going to create one. But this is, I guess, what a normal task ends up looking like. Does this look fun? .NET build, and then some extra arguments that we don't really need. Sure. We can drop these, I think. Ask.NET build to generate full paths for file names. Okay. I guess that could make some sense. So what happens if I try to run this build? We should see output somewhere. Debug console, that's not right. Output. I can't tell if anything happened. That's no good. Okay, that was I guess the last thing I expected to happen. I expected to see either an error or some sort of output, and I didn't. So great. Let's create a launch file, because why not? And see what that does. There we go. So we created a .NET Core launch file. This is used for launching the debugger. It kind of tells it where everything is and how to run it. Workspace folder, and then like the default directory. This should be fine for most stuff. Depending on the language, you're going to need to customize this and do all of that stuff. I'm hoping for .NET Core, typically this just works out of the box and you don't need to modify things. And so I'm hoping that's the case here. It might not be. We might run into issues, but we'll see. But we now have this option to run things. So let's go into our program and just stick a breakpoint in. Jump back here. And let's just run this. So we should hit a breakpoint. Cool. Okay. So breakpoints still work. We can still access breakpoints and do all of that fun stuff. And we should be able to, I guess I can't really create a watch because there's nothing to watch. We have arguments. There's no arguments. Our debug console is there. I don't think there's anything that we can really do here. We could try setting up some like custom arguments here. Does this even work? Yeah, cool. Okay. So debug console seems to work. We can actually change our locals. So in this case, I just auto assign 2 arguments to the thing. I don't think there's any reason you would need to do that, but that's the only variable in this program right now. So that's what we did. We should be able to create new ones too, right? So int I equals 0. I've never tried that, so I don't know if that works, but it seems like it did. So we can do like I equals 1 now. Modify that. Sure, why not? That seems to all work as I would expect it to. So that's cool. Debugging seems to work. We can continue and do all of that fun stuff. We get hello world. Cool. So cool thing. All of those seem to work. I would imagine tests would work too. I don't have a testing project set up for this, but you should be able to do tests and things as well. I haven't had any issues with other remote stuff. So I would imagine that would work in this containerized environment as well. There's probably some other questions, like certain things probably don't work well in containers. Unity development, for example. I have struggled with containerized Unity development. It doesn't work very well. A lot of that has to do with, well, one, there's a big UI that you need to run, and you're not going to run that in a container. There's no reason to. And two, there's just a bunch of like licensing things with Unity, and the per seat licensing that they do doesn't always play well with containers. I've run into a case where it takes out a new seat every time I create a new container, and you only get 2. So that doesn't work very well. So I would avoid it in that case, unless there's some other better way to do this. And there's not really any point in that specific case. But for like cloud development, for example, if you're building like ASP.NET or Spring Boot or some other project, I could see this being really helpful. So yeah, I guess that's that exploration. What else? What else should I do? I don't really know. I have a bunch of things that I've kind of been meaning to poke at, and I don't really know whether I should or not. It's getting kind of late here. It's 10:30 at night. I meant to start streaming earlier, but it was 100 degrees in this room today, and so I figured I'd wait for it to cool down. So hopefully it isn't like that for the rest of the summer, because that would be unfortunate. But we'll see. I'm trying to do more streams, so hopefully there will be more of this kind of stuff. Especially doing it on the weekends. If I can start doing that on a more or weekdays, I guess, if I can start doing that on a more regular basis, it'd be really nice. But yeah, if there's ideas that people have that they would like me to look at, let me know, and I'll do my best to take a look. I'd really like to use these streams as sort of a way to explore random things that I don't normally have time to do on like a normal YouTube video, especially like things like this, where it takes an hour of just kind of poking at things that I don't really understand. Going through this in a YouTube video, just like a normal YouTube video, would probably be like 10 minutes. We spent an hour on it, and that's kind of expected. It's the first time we're taking a look, and so we're just kind of trying to figure it all out. And so, yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. But there's certain things that makes a lot of sense with, especially like building a full game. Doing that in YouTube is very hard. Doing that here, I'm hoping, is much easier. So we kind of started Minefield a while ago. I'm hoping to go do more of that. And I have some other projects that I'd like to poke at as well. So that's probably what I'll be using Twitch for mostly. Otherwise, we'll probably be doing gaming stuff, or whatever. I might just do some like Risk of Rain quick and just kind of poke at that, because why not? But we'll see. I feel like I had something that I wanted to poke at, but I didn't make a list. So I don't remember. So yeah, pretty sure that's that's that. Let's do